All right, great. Alvaro De La Rocha has joined me today. And Alvaro, I'm so happy to have you here because Kellogg,
Way
and
back.
we go back, yeah. And I had Gil Ayal from Hyper and Jen Saxton from Tot Squad on here. So I love bringing on Kellogg founders, Kellogg marketing leaders onto the show. So I'm so glad to have you here. Alvaro is CMO at Bespoke Post, and you have also held some roles at Ogilvy and Microsoft on the product and marketing side. So, yay! I'm so glad to have you here. You were my we went to business school together, and you were my year's leader for our orientation, and you still look the same. The
Good
folks
old
that will
Sim.
the folks that will see the YouTube videos as it rolls out on that channel, they'll be able to just double check, but not in the audio version. So Bespoke Post, lots of
Yeah.
Kellogg folks there. There's Arishi and Steven, co-founders, and I am pleasantly surprised to find that. And maybe you can tell me more, like, how did you guys all get together there? Maybe like how did you partner up with both of them?
Yeah, so both Kelloggers, I did not know Steve in school, but I did know Rishi because he was in your section as well. So he was actually, I would never say we were super good friends during the business school process, but we were acquaintances. And so I was at Microsoft and I was looking to make a move. Actually, it was just right post Microsoft, and I wanted to go into the startup space. And so I had heard that Rishi had just started something like not even a year before that. And so I shot him an email out of the blue because I hadn't talked to him in at least a year and said, hey, I just want to get from your standpoint, what do you think would be a good way to position my experience? Because at that point, as you mentioned, I was at Ogilvy, so I was advertising. I spent 6 years in advertising, went back to business school, and then actually went to Microsoft for a couple of years. And so I was going from these two very large companies to kind of this entrepreneurial startup space. And I wanted to ask his advice that he had just been starting in that area, like how could I position my experience? So we grabbed drinks at a place near the co-working space. And we chatted for a couple hours. I got to meet Steve at that point. And then at the end of the chat, I was like, by the way, if you ever want me to help pro bono, since I know it's just the two of you right now, and they had one creative person that just started, Pete. And they were like, as Rishi said, let me give you a piece of advice. I don't think you should work for free for anyone because this kind of sets your value to them, to the market. So then I was like, okay, sure. The offer stands. So then went home and I get an email from Rishi 2 weeks later. And he's like, hey, do you want to work for free? And I was like, you just gave me this advice, not what? But of course I said yes. And so I told them I can come in 3 days a week for 4 hours a day because I was actually in the midst of a job search at the same time. That immediately turned into 5 days a week for 10 hours a day because I just loved it. And so it was probably 3 weeks later, 3.5 weeks later, and I was spending no time on a job search because I was like there 5 days. I didn't even my weekends. I was so into it. And so I went to Rishi and was like, hey, just so you know, I actually need to start coming in only 3 days a week because I need to find a job. And they came back to me that afternoon and offered me something. It wasn't in their plans to hire anyone on the marketing team for at least a year. But you know, I think we both saw it was a fit. So I went from being told never to work for free to working for free to quickly having a job all in the span of like 3 weeks. It was lots of fun.
That's how it works in startup world.
It is.
Decisions are made on in 30 minutes. So
Yeah, and they were told when they asked their advisors about bringing someone on so early when it was not planned. They're like, if you find someone you think is right to help you, right, just take advantage of it. And you have to kind of break from your plans sometimes.
that's really good advice, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, great story. So Bespoke Post was founded in 2011, right? So you've been doing this for 8+ years, and it's 73 people or so, and based out of New York City. On the funding side, you guys have raised $8.9 million. And I just want to give a quick blurb on like what is Bespoke Post so people have an idea. Goods and guidance delivered monthly. So what does that even mean? So it's for men, right? Upgrading your day-to-day life through themed boxes full of enviable gear. So things like shaving sets, shoe shine kits, home bar essentials. And you're partnering with under the radar brands so that people can discover some of the coolest stuff, some of the coolest goods and gear. The other awesome thing that I read was that during COVID, you've actually purchased over $38.4 million worth of products just from small businesses. That's really cool. How does a startup actually even like do that? Maybe you can talk through. Tell me, like, how did you do that?
So we've always at our ethos been about product discovery and discovery of brands and discovery of product experiences. It's kind of the core of what we do. I think our special sauce, so to speak, is our buying teams, both on the subscription side of the business and the e-commerce side of the business. They just have this way of finding the coolest up and coming brands and products and experiences. And so it's always been part of our DNA. We work with small businesses. We actually, for the most part, wouldn't carry very established brands in our shop or in our boxes. And so when COVID happened and the pandemic broke out, it was actually a very scary time for us initially internally, because we didn't know how our business was going to survive and what we need to do. So we took an initial wait and see approach. And then we began to be seeing, a boon from some people kind of going online more. And once we saw that kind of we were safe and actually beginning to thrive even more so, we decided, like, how can we give back? And so being at that ethos was small business. It was like, why don't we pledge a certain amount? And it started at $10 million to buy $10 million worth of products from small businesses. It's already kind of at the core of what we do, but we can like really put kind of focus on it. And so we created a survey, a link on our site. We began sending emails out and just, outreach, because what it was, there are established brands who are already online. They could already find us and may have known about us before, but there are also a lot of these brick and mortar or other types of brands who are just trying to find creative ways to stay alive. So we began getting in front of those people and getting introduced, whether it be to like a bitters company that now lost their bar business, or a host of others. It was just a great way of kind of solidifying that ethos we already had into something that could be helpful. So yeah, so we've I think even as of right now, we're probably over $40 million since we started that. And now I think it's going to become less a number we keep updating and more something we make sure we talk about in general, because that is what we do. So it's both on the e-commerce side of the business and subscription that we focus working with these smaller businesses.
That is super cool. That is super cool and relevant how you tie that into your brand. And it just makes sense, and you can like continue doing this. And I'm sure that your users love it.
Yeah, and it's with the goods and guidance piece that you read before. A lot of the goods is kind of self-explanatory. It's what I've been talking about, that product discovery and finding out about cool things. But there's a guidance component that comes with it, given the era we play in. So one, there's guidance around who are these brands you're learning about, right? There's so many great stories about these small businesses, whether it be like a mother and daughter owned candle brand, or a host of other stories, and being able to tell that's part of the guidance. There's also the guidance part of new experiences. So we have this box called Smoked, and it's all about how you can smoke your own cocktails, your own liquor. And so if you're going to deliver a product, for many people may not have been aware they can even do that, right? You need to provide the guidance piece of that. So what are some great smoked cocktail recipes, or how do you even smoke a cocktail? So there's a guidance part around there. And there's also a guidance part around like the history of a particular product or experience. So that's where I think, given that we're all so discovery driven, and that's the core of what we do, naturally with that comes guidance, because you're hopefully introducing kind of your members to new things all the time.
Yeah, and I just want to like mention this quote from Esquire, where they said you can't put a price on the fun you'll have opening the boxes. So now you've kind of solidified like what do you guys do? Who are you for a little bit? Can you talk like who are you for? Like who is this person? Who is this man or woman or whoever is really into like because I could see this as gifting. Like I could go on your site and
Uh-huh.
actually I've been looking for some really nice shirts for home, you know, my husband to wear at home because they're just getting a little bit like
We have some of
the
those.
same thing over and over. I know, I saw. I was looking at the site and I saw some pretty awesome clothing. So who is this person that wants to know to get that goods of
Yeah.
you know the alcohol, but also how do you actually smoke the liquor and
So
then like be really knowledgeable and share it with someone else and you
yeah.
know who is that?
So we have had an evolution, even in what you're explaining. We did start off as a brand focused for men, and I think so. The reaching Steve's initial thought was that many times men in retail and e-commerce were largely ignored. All it talks about the power of the purse and the purchasing power there, but that there could be a retail or e-commerce experience crafted more towards the male. And so that was the whole idea of a subscription and like hunting for the best products so you don't have to. And that was kind of where it started. But where we've evolved to is in a couple of ways is one, we through surveying, we found out that actually our base is equally comprised of people who love to shop and who hate to shop. For people who hate to shop, it is that element of like, just tell me what's cool now and then maybe I'll buy it. For people who love to shop, we're almost become like a resource of look at this new cool thing you may not know about. That was like one part of the evolution. And then the other part is that we are not just for men anymore. And we had realized that over the years, to what you were saying, is most of our products are not gender specific. And so we kind of removed that tag a bit. And I would say, 90+% of our boxes that we create on a month-to-month basis, anyone can enjoy. And so I think who we're for, I think at the root of it, the psychographic part of it is curious people. I think people who are willing to try new things, because we don't, traffic in extremely well-known brands, and you have to be open to try new things. And demographically, we do tend to be in that like 25 to 45 age range would be our core demographic. But we do find people younger and older than that who is very interested in what we do.
That is super interesting. I could see how it's the curious people. It's like you're open to supporting small brands. You're just like looking for the new, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like you don't want to just be good with what Costco is selling.
Yeah. I would say, like if our e-commerce store is compared to Amazon, I always say, if you know what rocks glass you want to buy, you'll probably just go to Amazon first and search for it. If you want to find out what are some cool rocks glasses you should consider buying, you should maybe come to Bespoke Post, because we'd have like more of a curated, limited selection of ones that we find really cool. And that's kind of a slight difference, I believe, in that mindset.
Is there some kind of like a checklist before you bring on a new partner or player that offers goods? Is there like, what do you look for in these small businesses before you actually bring them on board?
So our buying team does a ton of diligence on products. So, they'll go to trade shows, they'll constantly be surfing the interwebs for things they find interesting. So once they find something, they definitely get samples in and want to test it out, see what sort of quality it is. There's not any one defined checklist. I think it has to be quality first and foremost. We definitely we stand by. I think one thing we often hear when people get our boxes or get products from us, like just how high quality they are. So I think that's first and foremost. But after that, is it something our consumer would enjoy? Whether it be, and it's not always something we know for sure they'd enjoy, because sometimes it's a new experience, right? But something we think fits their general mindset. So aside from that, and then I think there is some element of discovery to it, where again, I think, if Levi's came to us and said they want to be sold in our shop, we might say no, because it's, people already know about Levi's, and we'd rather reserve that spot for a new brand we can introduce someone to.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Levi's is probably, is that a dated reference? Am I showing my age? But
Say that.
Jeans, is that a dated reference?
Levi's? No. I think some people
They're
still
timeless,
wear.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't heard their name for a long time, but I'm sure someone's still wearing them. So let's talk about the marketing team. Who is on the team? Anything unique in the way that you're structured right now?
So the marketing team is roughly separated into, I would say, like 5 groups, if I'm remembering correct. So there's the growth team, or paid acquisition. So they're really focused on driving new traffic to the front door. Largely our focus from a paid perspective is subscription and growing our subscription product out. That is where we focus most all our spend. Then there's a retention team. And so if the growth team's key job is to get kind of people to the site, it's the retention team to convert them, 1, and then 2, maximize kind of their lifetime value for us, and also maximize customer loyalty. So things like looking at NPS and things like that. So they kind of take over the relationship at that point. Then there's PR and partnerships, which is kind of self-explanatory. Social media. So social media sits under marketing at Bespoke Post. So that's our organic, social media presence. And then customer service, which we call customer experience, also actually sits under the marketing org. And it is a rather large team there as well. So that's kind of the rough setup of our team.
Awesome. Nice. Okay. That helps me understand the breakdown. And so your experience at the company, right? Over 8 years, you started as the director of marketing. What were you working on in those early days? Like, what did you immediately set out to do? And given that you're lean at that time, like, how do you stand out?
Yeah, so we obviously didn't have much budget to speak of in the early days. So we definitely had to be creative and scrappy. I remember Rishi and I would spend sometimes hours crafting our Facebook post for the day, because that was like our main traffic driver. So we'd argue over commas and what's the best way to kind of get engagement, because if people started commenting on anything, you'd get served more, and so that take up tremendous parts of our day. But I think the reason, you remember when I told you that I told them I'd start looking for a job, and they came back to me that same day. I think the reason that they brought me on full time was I saw this emerging, overlooked channel at the time. Now, this is back in 2012. So we're talking 9 years ago. So I'm not sure if you've heard of this, Anna. This channel, it's called podcasts.
No way.
So
Back in 2012?
Yes. So Apple only released their podcast app that year. Before that, it was actually under iTunes, I believe. It's where you find podcasts. But when I came on, I was a big listener of podcasts back then. And it's still the case now, right? But more so then, what you had in podcasts were these like extremely loyal audiences listening to someone they're already aware of through some other way, whether it be Adam Carolla, comedian, or a technology thing like Leo Laporte, like these really dedicated audiences. But there was not yet the marketing, the advertising spend audience there. So I know, like I read that this year it's gonna be over $1 billion paid in spend put towards podcasts worldwide. In 2013, so we're talking a year after when we're talking about now, 2013 was 40 million total in paid ad spend that year. So what I told Rishi and Steve was like, listen, there's this thing I listen to that's called podcasts. I don't know if either of them listened to actually podcasts at the time. I was like, I think I can get them to run on cost per acquisition deals. So we wouldn't pay them up front, but we'd say for every subscriber you drive, we'd pay you a set amount. And they said, sure, try it. So I started reaching out to different podcasts, and definitely many said no, that they want to be paid up front. But there were some that said yes. In fact, the first big score I got was This Week in Technology, TWiT, which is Leo Laporte. And at the time, it was one of the largest podcast networks. He has a range of tech podcasts, and he would do a live stream at the same time he recorded his podcasts. And so we would see these large traffic spikes during his live streams. And as the podcasts go out, we'd maintain some sort of traffic. So that was, I think, the first big score for me from a marketing perspective in terms of something at scale beyond like Facebook posts. So that was a huge win. And then we started doing affiliates. as well. So there's a lot of subscription blogs were becoming a thing, and so getting on some of those really helped. And then really, I would say the turning point was when Facebook figured out themselves their lookalike audiences. I think would be one when they started doing their lookalike audiences. It was I think the huge turning point. It was literally overnight because I was spending a tiny bit on Facebook each day, and it was not working. And like almost overnight, it started working. And I remember turning to Reggie and Steven being like, "We have to buy Facebook stock now." I think they figured it out. I didn't buy Facebook stock at that point, and I'm still kicking myself over it. But it's true at that point. Then more and more, a lot of our growth came from actual marketing spend and investing in Facebook in those early days.
That is so cool. The fact that you mentioned the podcast and like that was a bet, right? You took a bet on that. You were doing some of the regulars, right? You're on doing organic social, you're doing affiliates, but then that was a bet at that point, and that's cool that you hit it on the head.
Yeah, you have to get creative when you don't have much of any budget. So
that's right.
Make cold calls to these podcast producers and be like, "Hey, we'll pay you, but you're not upfront."
And it worked, it sounds like.
Yeah, it did.
That's super cool. That's super cool. All right. So then let's fast forward a little bit. You were promoted to VP of marketing. Then you were promoted to CMO. You seem to be doing everything right. What did you take on for each subsequent role? Like, how did you ensure at each point that you were going to be successful and continue to get promoted?
So I think that title trajectory probably more maps up with our evolution as a growing company, probably more so than anything I might be doing. Well, hopefully the fact that we're growing has something to do with it. But I think when I was first joined, director of marketing, they didn't have titles even at that point. Like, let's make you director of marketing. But it was a team of one, right? So at that point, I could have been just called marketer, and that'd probably been just as accurate. But then I think that first promotion was a team was beginning to form. So I hired someone initially to take on some of the growth responsibilities. And then I hired Taylor, who's still with the team today, to help me with email and retention activities. And so I think as a team began forming and we started feeling like a real company, I think that's when we like, okay, we should have VPs of the company. And now, as you mentioned, we're nearly 70 people. And so we just actually introduced the C-suite level this year. So Rishi and Steve became co-CEOs. I myself became Chief Marketing Officer. Jared, who's been with us for almost 6 years, became our Chief Technology Officer. And then Michelle, who's been with us for over a year, Chief Merchandising Officer. So I think it's part of our growth as a company that, we're not small potatoes anymore. So kind of doing that. And then in terms of ensuring success, obviously, there's no way you can ensure success. But I think that if I did say the number one thing, I say two things that has helped me throughout the progression is good hiring. I think my team is amazing. The whole Bespoke Post team is amazing. I'm going to personally vouch for my own team is first and foremost, they're just great. So I think you hire good people, you're going to get good results, right? So I think that's number one, regardless of what I'm doing. That's like, what did David Ogilvy, I'm going to quote my first company and the founder, David Ogilvy, he say, if you hire giants, if you hire people taller than you, you'll become a company of giants. I'm paraphrasing him, I got that a little wrong, but I kind of love that quote, and I think it's very true. So that's one thing. And the other thing is knowledge sharing. So I am continually talking to people at sister companies, that other disruptor /DTC/subscription, however you want to put it, companies, and we knowledge share, because everyone is going through these very rapid but different learning curves. And by kind of learning from others' mistakes or others' successes, you can kind of speed up your own learning curve. And so I think throughout the process, when I first started a team, I started talking to other people, okay, how do you set up your teams? What are important things that you look for in your first or second hire? And so I think those two have been integral to like the success.
Yeah, and is that knowledge sharing across your network? Like, are they just like folks that you've known for a while and you trust and you kind of built that out, or is there like a particular? I mean, there's like Growth Collective, right? You pay a monthly or a yearly amount, and then you get connected to these leaders. How did you go about doing this?
Yeah, so it's, for me at least, it started early. One of the first years that I was at Bespoke, I went to my first conference. and I think it was in Florida. And I met someone, Aaron from Beta Brands, and we hit it off and we talked, and I loved the conversations we had. So, and I met a couple other people at that conference. So I decided to start a Slack group of marketers I'd met there, and that slowly started growing. And then one of the people I brought into that Slack group told me about another Slack group that was much larger than the one I had created, and so I joined that one. So one way was like I basically have these 2 large Slack groups now that I can just ping at a moment's notice and be like, hey, anyone have, even as something as small as like, hey, Facebook CPM seem to be going up right now. Anyone else seeing that? To, hey, we want to test a new marketing consultant vendor. Anyone know anyone good? And so I would say, oh, I know Anna. So there are things like that. But then also, yes, you develop more of those one-on-one relationships through introductions, through people who share similar investors. So I think it's both individual kind of relationships you cultivate over time, and there's also kind of these larger forums I can kind of immediately go to and ask.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. I think these are like the little nuggets where it's people want to figure out how to do it, but they don't quite know like what's the best way. And this seems to be working out for you, where you kind of develop these Slack channels, these networks that you trust. And sure, you have folks on the side here and there that you meet, but that seems to be a really effective way. You have a question, you just kind of send the message over, and you get some really bright minds answering that question. So
yeah, and I think people will find, even if they don't have immediate access to something like that, if you know anyone in the space or even LinkedIn stock, most people are very open to talking because they've been there, right? They know what it's like to kind of growth hack your way into something, or when you're small and growing. So especially in that startup community, I feel people are very open and willing to talk. I've never had anyone say no to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, let's talk about today, marketing.
Yeah.
What is working really well for you right now? What channels? You've talked about a bunch where as the company grew, you hired more people in. Like, what is working particularly well right now for you guys?
Yeah, this might surprise you, but Facebook/Instagram is our number one channel, and has been ever since that fateful year where they started working for us. Their just ability to scale is still, I think, unmatched. So that is by far our number one channel. Number 2, to bring this full circle, podcast actually I think become our second largest channel as of last year actually. So our team has done a great job of scaling that. But I think the newest entrant that is of note and interest is TikTok, actually, from a paid perspective. So I think in February it was our second largest channel in terms of ad spend. And so we're really bullish on that. Anna on my team, who kind of tackled it, did a great job, and kind of jumping on early in the pandemic. TikTok's one of those companies, right, that saw that massive growth trajectory. And so we decided, we've always had a philosophy of get in early type thing. And so we started, and so it didn't work for a while, but it has started working. And there's a virtuous cycle to when something starts working, because then you give it more attention. And the more attention you give it, hopefully the better it can start working. So whereas TikTok would get, repurposed ads from other platforms, since it started working, it started getting its own ads, and our creative team focusing a little more. And so there's that virtuous cycle. So TikTok, definitely a huge, but then we're also on Snapchat, Pinterest, Reddit, Live Intent, which is display banners and email. And those are all kind of much smaller in terms of spend, but you put them all together, all of a sudden, they become something somewhat substantial. So we were actually in quite a bit of channels, and we have the luxury of now of a larger growth team, so we can kind of manage it. Whereas before, I think, and it's part of the evolution, right? When you're starting up, you have to be a little more choosy, because you can't, if you're doing too many things, you're doing none of them well. And so
absolutely.
Now we have benefit.
I preach that all the time. You got to prioritize early stage. Otherwise, you're going to dilute the impact of anything. So I totally get it. But now that you're bigger, you can do a lot more with the team that you have. Can you talk a little bit more about, because sometimes I love bringing on both B2C and D2C and B2B, and because at the end of the day, we're all talking to people and we're all marketing to people. So what is it that you do that makes Facebook and Instagram work really well for you? Like what are you leveraging that makes it work really well? Maybe you could talk about TikTok as well?
Yeah. From the Facebook perspective, I think there's been certain points at which we were unsure if we're going to be able to scale it past where we were at that point, and each time something different unlocked. I think the most recent unlock, which was probably from like 2 years ago maybe, was I think we were being too precious about creative and creative output. We have our creative team is entirely in-house, and so there's a lot of need for their time, because whether it be the product photography, site work, and all the demands they have, we were probably being too structured in, okay, each month we'll brief in a new set of creative and get a new set of creative and launch them. And a lot of what Facebook was talking about at the time, which turned out, I think, it's really true, that it's a quantity game, and it's impossible to predict what Facebook ad's going to work. We've tried. It's the only thing for sure is that you'll probably get it wrong and you won't be able to predict. So we decided to kind of let even people on my team be creators and create ads. And so initially, Jake on our team, one of the early successes we had, he had this. He was on the growth team, not quote unquote creative, and he found this app on his iPhone which you can make like cinemagraphs, so you could take a still image and add slight movement to it. And so he just took some of our lifestyle photography and started adding slight movement to it, and those ads started working really, really well. And then from then on, every successive hire that came in, we just luckily hired people that actually had this eye to just also create ads themselves. So all of a sudden, like, instead of having, one or two people from the creative team creating ads, a couple of ads every month, we just had kind of unleashed ad creation. And so we've only doubled down on that since then. So now we have 3 people on the creative team who are pretty much dedicated to paid acquisition. We have an agency. Now, again, benefits as you get bigger, you can do things like this. We have an agency we've hired to help us also create ads, in addition to the marketing team itself. If they want to, they can still create ads. So it's like anyone can create ads. And then part 2 of that is, if you're going to open the floodgates, you can create bottlenecks. And so the bottleneck could be like creative reviews. So we actually don't have creative reviews. They can create an ad, get it up, and we can post-mortem it, or, it's almost like, ask forgiveness, not permission. So if there's an ad up there that we think is a little too off-brand, someone created, we'll be like, hey, why don't we take that down? Unless it's working, then we'll have to discuss it. But I think, right, before we were too bogged down and like, oh, I know this ad, should we launch it? I don't like how that, like, the coloring in that, and it just slows the process down. So it's like more creators and almost less control. And then I think that helped tremendously.
That's amazing. That is so interesting, because it's like going backwards. Yeah. I mean, the company a little bit, the way that you mentioned you and Rishi sitting down and obsessing over commas on those organic social posts at the very early days, and then talking through where you got a little bit more structure. And then you're like, nope, got to get rid of that structure. And you're the biggest that you've ever been. And you got different people, not necessarily creative team, creating those ads and removing that review. And then like the ads kind of fight it out, right? Or the people, I guess, decide what ads.
The ads fight it out. And we've come up with the kind of test and release structures to some of our campaigns. So we'll have like a Facebook ad setting campaign that's dedicated to testing new creative and then releasing it into like our larger campaigns. So there's structural things we've done over the years too. But I think the first unlock was like, now we have the best of both worlds, because actually now the marketing team is the first to admit to you that a lot of the ads we would create were not the prettiest looking or not the most on brand. But now we've been able to grow, right? And now we have more people. Like, our creative team is amazing. So they actually have the bandwidth to create ad volume now and just make it look amazing.
Do you or do the co-founders, does the exec team like ever worry that if you just release control and don't do the reviews and you've got like ads out there, that you're just kind of like going off brand and that might actually hurt you? Is that ever a fear, or it's
100%,
fine?
100% fear. And we've talked about it for years now. And I think that is part of the evolution where we've gotten into now that we have, I will say in the last couple quarters, I would say that the amount of creative coming out of the marketing team has reduced to probably close to 0, because now we've been able to build out a team. And so part of the edict behind that team is, how do we keep something that works from a direct response perspective? Because there are things that just work there that, is not as branded, but still make sure it stays aligned with what we're trying to develop as a brand. But yeah, we had those 2 years were full of conversations about an ad that was doing really well, but it just felt not right to our brand. And so we had, once the ad was up, kind of, we'd have those conversations and determinations. But now I think we're on our path as we build out our creative team to kind of get the best of both worlds, get something that is direct response focused, and we could build that scale and still try to have it be on brand.
Yeah. What would be, I'm just like curious for this quick answer, but what would be the personality of the brand? Like, are you kind of edgy and maybe sometimes a little bit like testing the waters with some of the things you do? Or are you just a bit more, I don't know, like what's the personality?
That's interesting. This is now 4 years ago when we were going through a rebranding exercise, and we were still male focused, and our some people helping us branding asked us, like, what celebrity would you be? I remember like 3 of the 5 of us said Ryan Reynolds. So there was that back in the day. But now I think we've evolved, like I said. So I think it's a little different. I think we try to be a trusted advisor, but accessible. We never want to be like preachy, as if, you know, we want to be the portal through which you're discovering new things, but not telling you, like, our base is naturally curious. And so it's not like we're inspiring their curiosity. They're just curious, and we're just presenting them with things that help kind of stoke that a little more. So from a brand perspective, to give like a personality, I think it's you know, your trusted friend. It's kind of telling you, hey, you should try this new thing. You should try smoking your own cocktails.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Let's talk about, before we jump off of this, I actually wanted to ask you about the podcast because it's your number 2 like driver of growth. And I just want to understand a little bit more, just like you were talking about how you're making the ads work on Facebook and Instagram and even TikTok. Like, what is it with the podcast that you're doing that's working really well?
Well, you know, one, in hindsight, I would go back and change it. We actually got off podcasts for a while. So I told you we were like, that was one of the first things I did. But then podcasts started becoming popular. They started charging. So they weren't doing those CPA deals anymore, and they wanted us to pay up front, and we weren't seeing success. So we actually got off the podcast train for maybe like 4 years. And then in 2018, I'm guessing it was, we decided, we had heard, again, I was talking to my friends throughout in the space, particularly someone at SeatGeek, which is a sports event ticketing company that's quite popular. And podcasts working great for them. I talked to someone else also for them. I was like, okay, I think we need to get back in this, because obviously direct response focused advertisers are making this work. Let's get back in there. So we did, and it wasn't working again for us. And we went 4 or 5 months. And then we realized that we think it was our name and the recall memorability of the name that was creating a bit of a hurdle. So Bespoke Post is actually something, the word bespoke, I think for people, it's not a word everyone knows. And so Bespoke Post was just hard on the memorability front. And so we have the trademark for this term, Box of Awesome. So that's what we call our boxes. And we had put it on the shelf on a rebrand, and it had stopped using it. But we decided, let's do a test. Let's use Box of Awesome. We also had the URL. We have the domain, boxofawesome.com. And let's that be at the front and center of all the reads and not Bespoke Post. And so we did that, and literally overnight, podcast started working for us, because Box of Awesome was just so much easier, I think, for people to remember. Because this is the first time we've really been doing an offline channel, right? When you're doing a Facebook or a TikTok, you can just click on the ad. But on podcasts, you're waiting for someone. You need someone to remember, and later in that day, go and check. So that was a huge unlock for podcasts. And then really it's kind of this test process. So we've been able to set aside budget to test podcasts, because you will, like, it kind of like ads. It's actually hard to predict what podcasts work for us. It could be a live read versus more of a taped read, or it could be a sports show or a politics show. And we haven't found like a consistent, there's some nuggets of like consistency we might see, but for the most part, we just need to test into a lot of shows. And so,
like, where are those curious people?
Yeah.
They're all curious.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
listening to podcasts.
Exactly. And like you'll see like one time we'll have one comedy podcast really work for us. We're like, oh, it's comedy. Let's do a couple other comedy podcasts, and they all do well. So it's just sometimes the right mix of host, product, read. But this test budget we set aside that kind of freed up the team to be unconstrained to CPA targets, really, like not worry about our CAC and just like, here's what you can use. And so slowly we've been able to build out like a core, grouping of shows that work, and we just slowly build it through a kind of test process.
Cool. Interesting that you say not worrying about our CAC. That is not something you hear often.
No, I mean, again, it's a small part of the budget off to the side where they can have that kind of
test
play around with. And again, that came with a little bit of size. And when we had budgets that were big enough that I can apportion a little bit of it to do that. But for many small brands, that is not possible. Like Bespoke Post in 2016 we couldn't have done that. But we felt it was important to let that channel grow.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about differentiating yourself from other players, other subscription boxes of awesome. There are no other boxes of awesome, right? So
Nope.
How do you differentiate from others, other subscription boxes, other ways that people can actually like be curious and explore and find stuff online? Because there's a bunch of ways, right?
Yeah. I think one key way is in terms of differentiation from subscription companies, we're cross-category. I think is the first big one. We're not just about grooming or about apparel, clothing, or drink. And you'll find a lot, not all, but a lot of subscription companies tend to be uber focused. So we're about all those things, but also travel and EDC and kitchen and home. So the boxes can cover any host of different categories. And we actually, upon sign up, people have to take a quiz. And it's like we basically ask you how interested you are across 10 or 11 categories. And then that is our first indication to know what boxes to assign to you. So that's step one. But again, so I think that cross-category really helps you, because I myself was a subscriber to a clothing subscription company, but after a while I had enough clothing and I decided to pause that. Versus getting something new and different every month, I think is one key one. And the second one, again, some subscription companies have this, but I think many don't, is we don't require people to get something from us each month. So the way it works is on the first of the month, our subscribers get an email telling them what box they were assigned that month. And they have 5 days to opt out if they don't want it, or switch to another box, because we launch several boxes in a month. And so you actually be a subscriber with us and go a whole year without buying anything. So there's other benefits to subscriptions. So I think that kind of you being in control of your subscription is another differentiator. So I think those two together are the most important ones. And then the third one, which is like sits on top of all that, probably is our product assortment. Like I said, our buying team is our special sauce. And just, I think when someone comes to the site and looks at all the stuff we have, people are just like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then they get a box or they get an item they bought in the shop and they say, wow, this is high quality. So the first thing I mentioned is about kind of hooking you, I think. And then once you're like in the experience, those are the two things that differentiate us.
I'm always thinking like, what do I get the person that has everything, right? Like some of my guy friends or girlfriends, well, I want to get them something. Yep. Yeah. And so I'm going to check out the site, honestly, because so you do have folks come on there and purchase a gift, right? And then the person that gets the gift might decide that they want to subscribe.
Yep. Yeah, we have gift subscriptions. But interestingly, a lot of people assume when they hear about us that we're gifting focus, and that's the core of what we do. But actually, I don't know the exact numbers, but I bet you it's 90+% of our customers are just people buying for themselves. They've signed up to, many of our subscribers call it, it's like Christmas every month. Like they're the first of the month when they get that email to see what box they got assigned.
Yeah, you got to treat yourself. I think people forget that.
Especially these days where life's a little tough.
Yeah, I agreed. What's like the number one purchased or one or two top items that have been purchased in the last year? Just curious.
Well, we've seen huge growth in our camping and outdoors category, which makes complete sense, right? People are trying to get away in some way, and the main way people are able to do so in the last year is by doing outdoor activities, camping. And so we'd already seen prior to last year growing interest in that category. In that survey I mentioned that you take when you first sign up, actually camping and outdoors was the most popular category already. But then I think last year even supercharged it even more. So a lot on that front.
Cool.
And I'm trying to think of a box in specific that has been new. Well, I guess this at-home cocktail type stuff is always popular. And again, another thing that people are doing maybe a little more of these days. So this smoked cocktail box is an aged cocktail box, or both different ones that we've seen definitely become popular.
I wouldn't be surprised if that product spikes in sales after this show because you've mentioned it a few times. So tell me what are some really good marketing ideas you've come up with, like one or two in the past years that you've been at the company, and you shared with me like a ton of different things that you came up with, but is there anything else you'd like to add to that mix?
One from several years ago at this point is did not do specifically with anything about a specific channel or creative ad idea, but it was overhauling our landing page experience. So we actually came out again I went to get coffee with someone at a clothing subscription company, and we were talking about our conversion rates. And then we were trying to figure out why our Facebook performance was different, even though our click-through rates were the same, and we had similar product offerings, but our CPAs were not the same. And he told me his conversion rate, and I was like, what? And his conversion rate was like 4x ours. And so I was like, okay, so that is an issue. And we're still really small at this point. So I went right back to the office. I talked to Reggie and see like, listen, what conversion rate these guys are getting. They're a subscription brand as well. They're similar costs, all those things. And so we went to looking at their landing page and their landing page experiences. So we completely overhauled our landing page experience. We first removed anything else you can do besides subscribe. So we took off the e-commerce shop from it. We even took out the ability for you to go look at individual boxes. Literally all you could do was sign up. And then we changed it so you could join for free. Whereas before you had to like pay for your first box. Even if you were going to get it, you had to pay for your first box. And then we also introduced this idea of a quiz up front. And again, almost overnight, it was, depending on the channel, 4 to 6x increase in conversion rate. So that was like a massive unlock for a lot of channels became possible from a paid perspective. So it's many times we're big into A/B tests, but sometimes it's like big changes, big tests, that you need to do in order to see big results. And so like sometimes you maybe can A and B your way to death and a little too slowly. And that's coming from us who does a ton of that. Sometimes you need really big changes to make a big impact. So that was a big one. And then otherwise, I think it's more a couple strategic philosophies that I think help. I think I mentioned this earlier, willing to try channels early. We'd rather be early to channel and it not work than late. So TikTok being a great example. Last year, we were relatively early. It wasn't working. But if you get in early to channel, the competition's lower. So you're liable to see hopefully better CPMs. And then you get the learning curve kind of done with faster. So hopefully, I would think like where we are in the learning curve is maybe a little advanced to some other people. And so that's going to help us out as we build creative and stuff. So I think being early first. And then I mentioned another one, actually not being too precious about where ideas or creative ideas come from. Because it's cliche, but anyone can have a good idea, right? So,
yeah, these are 3 really good ideas that pack a punch. And the early to channel, I see people on LinkedIn argue about this, like quit talking about, that channel that just a Clubhouse, right? And figuring that out when you don't even have your LinkedIn marketing figured out, or stop with the LinkedIn marketing, like look at Clubhouse and get on there fast and figure it out before everyone else. and it's just like a war,
It's a
battle
balancing
zone.
act too. I mean, for every TikTok, right, we got into Twitter and Reddit 3 different times at this point, and each of the 2 previous times it hasn't worked. Now we're trying it again. It's maybe showing some signs. I think maybe it's early to channel, but also fast to quit, because to what we were talking about earlier, especially in a land of limited resources, you do need to prioritize. So it is a balancing act with that one.
Early to channel, fast to quit. I like that. That might be like the headline for one of the video clips I create. All right. Well, we have time for a little bit more. Maybe you can talk about what's your favorite failure? Like, we're always kind of, if we're growing in life, we try things, we might fail, we try, we learn, we try again, we might succeed. So what would you say is your favorite failure?
Well, the way you just put that makes me immediately think of PR, and we've had several dalliances with PR firms over the years. One of the first things, actually, I think 1 year in, we tried a PR firm, it didn't work. Then a couple years later, again, we tried it. It didn't exactly go as expected. So, and especially the younger we were, it was a big investment, right, to actually sign on PR firms, and it honestly failed. We didn't get the stories we thought we could. But I think what that taught me is that for our business in particular, I feel, and maybe that's wrong, but in-house was the way to go, and creating a PR team in-house first was the way to do it. So now last year in the middle of the summer, we brought in Madeline and now Jane, who also on our team, and it's been an amazing job. And I think I had to learn first about agencies and how in a certain way that may not have been right for us to get to that stage. And now, ironically, actually, we're going to bring out an agency again, but I think it's going to be successful because now there is a team in place to, I think the failure part of before is, I don't actually blame the PR agencies at all. It's like I was stretched extremely thin. Again, to repeat, you're doing many things, you're not doing any of them well. So if I wasn't telling the PR agency about the new product offering that may be worth like pitching, or the new thought I had, it probably wasn't going to work out. I only had like a 1 hour call with them once a week, and they're just not set up to succeed in that way. But I think learning in those years of failure led us to where we are today, where I think our PR and partnership game is extremely on point. I'm very excited as to like a lot of the traffic that's going to be driving, and is driving already.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting points here is when you bring an agency on, PR firm or anybody, and think that you just like can hand over here, do this work for us, and you're out doing your other stuff. Like, it just won't work out, right?
No.
It has to be a partnership, and also getting some early learnings or getting some folks that know what they're doing, and then bringing on the expert, and then bringing on the agency. That works much better versus here you go, take this over and figure it out for us. Because we did that when I was in early stage startup. We did that with like a Facebook advertising agency, and we said, take this over. And then it was like, oh, it's not working. And then we said, thank you very much. No, thank you. But it didn't work. Now, like, they work with other folks where it does work. It didn't work for us because of, that's exactly what we told them to do, is take this over. So
yeah, we also went through that similar like agency or in-house for Facebook and paid stuff, and we decided we wanted people in-house mainly because if you're using an agency, again, you're right, it works for plenty of people, but you're one of many clients in any one account rep's docket, account manager's docket. We wanted people who like were going to live, breathe Bespoke Post and our results day to day. And I think that was an early decision we made. I'm happy we made it. I think for us, it was our decision to like pay for someone to come on board and do that and manage that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Alvaro. We covered so much, and I had so much fun, and I learned so much from you. You are very wise. You were always a leader in my eyes because, ever since Kellogg, you stood up there at the front of the room and explained what we were going to cover during orientation. So thank you for coming on here. If folks want to reach out, you can find Alvaro on LinkedIn, Alvaro De La Rocha, and also Bespoke Post. Bespoke Post, you can go to bespokepost.com, which I will do to look at some of the cool stuff you have on there. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a ton of fun.